Hello, and welcome to our event today with Mick Herron. My name is Luisa Smith, and I'm the buying director for Book Passage, the editor-in-chief of Penzler Publishers, and the very lucky host of today's event. I would first like to thank all of you for being here today. We know you have a lot of options for how to spend your time on a beautiful Saturday like this, so thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Book Passage has a robust events program, both in-store and online, and is no small part due to supporters like you. I hope you will have a chance after today's event to visit our website and see who else is coming. Today, we are celebrating one of my favorite mystery authors, Mick Herron, in anticipation of his upcoming pub date for his latest spy novel, The Secret Hours, which will be in stores this coming Tuesday. The best novels are the ones that you don't merely read, but inhabit. And that is the experience of reading one of Mick Herron's books. The latest is a standalone, but if you're a fan, you will recognize the world that Mick has brought beautifully to life in his Slough House novels. The Secret Hours opens quite dramatically with a dead badger and a retired spy fleeing for his life. Soon we are drawn into political intrigue as the current government has opened an inquiry named Monochrome, sleight of hand promoting the appearance of transparency, but actually designed to hide any actual misconduct. That is until someone decides to use the inquiry to address a decades-old betrayal. Deftly moving us between Berlin just after the fall of the wall and London today, Herron creates a complex plot filled with layers of intrigue and astounding revelations. As one of his memorable characters says, in espionage, everyone is betrayed. And with that, I'd love to welcome Mick to the show here. We just love all of your books, but this new standalone is really quite outstanding. So congratulations.
Thank you so much, Louisa. Thank you. That's very, very kind of you. Thank you. And I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, and I love how it is a standalone that you've written here that we'll talk about more, but it is part of this world that you've created. It is both familiar to the reader, but something completely new, you know, and moving in a new country for part of it than what we've done before and what you've just done before. Can you walk us through a little bit the story of this new book and how or why you decided to write this novel?
Well, it grew organically, really, which I think is the best way for novels to develop. So I'd intended to write a complete standalone. All I had to start off with was essentially the opening sentence, the worst smell in the world is dead badger. And the scenario which immediately develops from that. The book opens with a man being woken up in his cottage in Devon, here in the UK, in the middle of the night by unknown assailants, and he ends up being chased down Devon's green lanes, which are these little tracks through the countryside. Those of you who've read Geoffrey Household's Rogue Male will perhaps remember the scenes in which his character gets chased down these very same green lanes. And that's what I had to kick off with. I knew that all I knew about the character was that he was a retired spy, and that whatever was going on was something reaching out of the past to claim him. And I'd intended to have a break from my series and to do something entirely different. And it ended up not being quite the break I'd expected, because I quite quickly found myself back in the same universe. I mean, it's not the same. It's not a Slough House novel. It's not in the series. But a lot of the same conditions prevail, if you like. And in the Slough House books, my version of the intelligence services live in a place called Regent's Park. Regent's Park is a real area of London, but I made it up. I mean, I made up the idea that the secret services have a headquarters here, and that features in the Secret Hours as well. So yes, I ended up edging back into a familiar world for me, but I had great fun with that. I enjoyed planting all these Easter eggs for my regular readers to pick up on and enjoy.
There's something that you just mentioned there, that how you made these things up. Now, I think a lot of us, when we read these spy novels, wonder how does the writer know all these things? And I believe I've read from a previous interview with you that your feeling is that the people that do know can't come out and contradict you. So you have freedom to make up what a spy world would be like, what would be the procedures, and you really get down by presenting details in like what forms would be required and what would you need to do to close an inquiry, what are the kind of standards and procedures. By doing that, gives it an authenticity, even if you're completely making it up. Is it fun to do that?
It is fun, yes. It is all about plausibility. I mean, you can make something sound very authentic by going into granular detail. Once you start inventing the granular detail, nobody's going to know otherwise. You know, if you start applying code names to forms and that sort of thing, then it sounds real. It sounds real. And my focus in this book, as I often do in the Slough House books, on the bureaucracy that's involved in the intelligence services, you know, the administration, all the kind of stuff that goes on beneath the surface to keep everything up and running. And that's the kind of material that automatically sounds like it must be real, because why would anybody bother making it up?
And while none of us know, not none of us, but very few of us know what it's like to be a spy. All of us know what it's like to work with other people. I told Mick before we got on air that I'm drawing all of my questions from his book because he's such a better writer than I am. So it's better than any question I could write. But this is something that they say about that Mick has written about spies. But perhaps this was the biggest secret of all, that spies were just like everyone else, especially when you lock them in an office. And I feel like that is sort of, it brings a sort of a genuine quality to it, because we all recognize that sort of office politics stuff, but you make the spies sort of locked in these battles over who left the, stinky yogurt in the fridge of the office, and then what they can do with that is sort of remarkable. Oh, did Nick freeze? I can keep talking. It's one of my favorite parts about the books is how Mick brings this sort of disgruntled office life to life in the books. Is Mick there? He's frozen. That's okay. And he does it beautifully throughout all the books. And this one, what's sort of wonderful is that not only does he have the intrigue of the office in at the park, but he also has the intrigue of what's happening in this inquiry where two people have been sort of shuttled. Their lives have been sort of put off track by having to do this inquiry that they realize isn't going to go anywhere. And then also the office in Berlin, which is a very different feel. The spies in Berlin, that time period, which is about 1994, is very different from London. And what can happen there. There, it feels as if the spies almost are out in the open in a way that they are not held in London, which kind of gives them an invisibility because it's so accepted that everybody's kind of spying and doing things. There's some wonderful things in here. There's a wonderful, I have a Berlin quote in here from him, which I love. Here it is, which I think must have been so much fun for him as a writer. And he said, because the best thing about Berlin is if you don't love it, just wait 24 hours. It'll invent itself. He said that must keep the tourist board busy. And I love that idea that he took a place that is constantly reinventing itself, and he's reinventing like what the world would have been like back then for a spy, what it would have been like to be a spy in a place that has sort of no rules as to how they're going to go. There's so many wonderful parts about this book, and I especially love, besides the fact that he does the office politics, he does the politics. You may not know that Mick actually went to Oxford at the same time as Boris Johnson. I don't know that they were friends, but he's definitely he's seen him up close and personal before he became who he was. And there's a lot of interesting things in here about a character that might be inspired by Boris Johnson, which is such a fabulous character to begin with. It says, he parlayed his newfound victim status into a leadership bid. The rest was history in the long-term sense of being both tragical and farcical. I love that about that. And it's wonderful to see these real events that he kind of weaves in to this world that doesn't really exist, but could exist, and we could believe in. I'm hoping that Zach is calling Mick and trying to get him back online, because I'm sure you do not want to hear me. Yes, you know what? I'm actually going to read, thank you, Zach, because there's a part that I love. We're going to just start with the opening, and I will read that because it is one of the best openings ever. The worst smell in the world is dead badger. He'd encountered it on his morning walk down the green lane, had caught the odor without seeing the corpse, but had guessed what it was before returning later with a shovel. Whether they all smelled that bad or whether this one had expired of noxious causes, he didn't know. As it turned out, he couldn't do anything about it either. The creature had crawled into a tangled nest of roots to die, and it would require heavy machinery and a strong stomach to recover it. Lacking the former and not wanting to put the latter to the test, Max opted for the third way. He'd walk a different route for a while and see if one of the local farmers shifted it in the meantime, which was why he wasn't sure if the badger would still be there a couple of nights later when he was running for his life. The first of the intruders entered through the kitchen window. Max said, "Oh, is Mick coming back?" "Oh, I hope so." "Oh, Mick, these poor people have had to listen to me prattle on." "Oh, his audio."
And I'm back. I'm so sorry.
No,
I
these
lost
poor
the internet.
people have had
I've
to
had to.
listen to you prattle on and on.
I'm really sorry about that. I've had to move location. I'm in a slightly different room now, and hopefully this will last. Where were we? Yes, thank you so much for reading that passage out. Funnily enough, it was quoted as the final line of a review in a newspaper here in the UK today, and the reviewer reckoned that that was the part of everything that I've written. This idea that
really? About the office?
Are just people, never more so than when they're locked in an office together. So evidently, without realizing it, this is the key text for everything I've written for the past 15 years. That particular sentence. So very well spotted.
It's I mean, I think it is something. It's something that's beautifully done because it is a microcosm of like the bigger world, but we can all recognize it. We all have people that frustrate us in the office, and people that we form bond with in the office, and you bring that to this. It brings sort of a truth to the book, even if you're making up these outrageous other things that they're doing. And I imagine it's a lot of fun, actually. The pettiness is fun.
It is fun, and it's the whole notion of write what you know, which is something that every author has to contend with at one level or another. I mean, I've never been a spy. I've never worked with intelligence services, but I have worked in an office, and all I've done with these books is take that experience and transpose it, if you like, to the larger world of the intelligence community. one thing I did learn about my working life when I worked for essentially, I worked in a publishing role. Essentially, it wasn't really a publishing company, but we published material. And I worked for a small company that got bought by a bigger one, and then a bigger one. I ended up working essentially for a big multinational corporation, although it had been a very small family firm when I joined it. And what I did learn was that the larger an organization gets, the more dysfunctional it becomes, and the worse its relationships with the people who are working within it. And that seemed to me that it was, if that was true of that, it was going to be true everywhere, of every kind of organization. And the Secret Service obviously is a large organization, but whatever its reason for existing and whatever its aims and ideals, it's always going to be run by people who are always going to have their own agenda.
Yeah.
And I just like to bring in all the kind of the pettiness and the quarrels and the arguments about whose food is in the fridge and that sort of thing that happens in every office all over the world, and apply it to the intelligence service as well. And that's, I suppose that's the one thing that I brought that I know about to the intelligence to my novels about espionage. Everything else I'm just making up.
And a lot of humor around that, which I love. But also, as you just said, like, it maybe gets worse as you get bigger companies, and maybe the biggest company would be the government, right? And you have a lot of political stuff in here. I mean, you always do have some, but it's really interesting to see how you incorporate what's going on now in your books without hitting us over the head with it, but it's very obvious. And my understanding is that you were at Oxford when Boris Johnson was there.
We did overlap a little bit at the same college. I never knew him. I mean, we never had a conversation of any sort. So everything that I write about him, or any character that might resemble him, is based on his public life, as it were, and what he's done in the political world. Which I entirely disapprove of, but everything is ever done. I have, over the past probably 6 or 7 years, made efforts to make sure that the political background of the which is there when I'm writing the novel is reflected in the book. So each book is set against the time in which it was written, and therefore, yes, I'm constantly commenting on the political backdrop. We've, since 2016 in particular, which is when I really started doing this, we've all lived in deeply interesting times, which has not always been to our credit.
That's a nice way of putting it. It's that horrible curse, right? May you live in interesting times. But you also take us back to a different political time, which is Berlin, 1994. And when you were offline, I was saying to the audience how wonderful it was to see that, and how different it was for spies to be in this place where there's almost an openness about being spies, or it's just a different culture altogether in terms of what being a spy is like, and then seeing people there, how they behave there. Was that fun to write about, or did you have to do a lot of research on that?
I did enjoy it. The research I did was very light touch. I was interested in what the feeling in the city would have been at the time, and what was attracting people there, and the kind of what people were wearing and what they were thinking about, as much as I could ascertain that, rather than going into sort of deep geographical detail or anything like that. I've been to the city a couple of times. I wasn't there at the time I'm writing about the city now, as I've very briefly known it is obviously a very different place. But that time intrigued me. I mean, the time when the wall had come down, and yet the scars were still visible, and unification had taken place, but there was still like two different sets of people in the one city, and they hadn't yet sort of melded together. And I've got no idea whether the stuff that you mentioned about everybody knowing can despise it, I've got no idea whether it was really like that, but it struck me as it would be fun to describe it as if it were like that. There must have been, chaos at the time, I think, and that's the kind of backdrop that I do enjoy writing about. So yeah, I had fun with it.
I think
I had
also,
thought that.
Sorry,
I was going to say I had thought that those passages would be difficult to write. I'd been kind of putting them off a bit, but as soon as I started, I thought, no, I can have fun with this. I'm really going to enjoy it, and I did.
It was a lot of fun to read, and I think it's also interesting because there's a sort of there's a, post-Sovietness to it. I think that's partly why it's believable that everybody accepts that everybody's a spy, because in Soviet times, everybody potentially was a spy. It was very openly, people are reporting on each other, and that you capture that sort of feeling in the book.
I felt that atmosphere would have prevailed there, despite the West having won, inverted commas, that particular part of the of post-war 20th century history. I felt that the atmosphere was probably coming more from the East than from the West. I thought it would have been difficult to completely dispel the paranoia and the suspicion and the worries that whatever you were doing, you were being observed by somebody else. That sort of thing isn't going to disappear overnight. And although we all saw the wonderful film of people celebrating as the wall came down and the joy that was there, and it was very easy to share in that joy and feel it at the time. I suspect that was kind of temporary. That was the party. I think I'm writing about the hangover.
Exactly. And you're writing about people who are doing, you have this spy in the beginning who's on the run, people with different lives and different periods of time. Is it interesting to write about, is it difficult to write about characters both now and then, people that are hiding who they are and then living one way and then being another? There seems to be a lot of that in this book. Well, maybe it's true of any spy novel, but is that sort of something of interest? Like, how do people accept that they're going to live both things, that they be both ways?
I think that's key to the genre, really.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked the other day about why I thought this spy novel was so popular, and has always been popular. And I think a lot of it has to do with that notion of identity. It's trite to point out that we all are different people at different times. We all wear different masks. We're all different people when we're on our own than we are when we're in company. Different people when we're in public or doing an event like this than we are when we're just with our friends. So that runs throughout our life. We're different people at work than we are at home, and so on. With the spy novel, I realised that not all spies by any means do this, but there's a core element to being a spy that would involve taking on a new identity, including all the kind of corroborative paperwork and so on. And that notion of having another identity that you can step into is one that I think is very appealing. At the same time, I think that this only occurred to me the other day. I don't know whether it's true or not, but the idea of leaving everything that you are behind is a huge part of that as well, and perhaps even more attractive. The idea that you could step out of your own life into someone else's is as much of the appeal of it as the idea of stepping into someone else's and pretending to be somebody else. It's losing yourself rather than taking on the new identity. I think I don't know how true this is, but I think that there must be a lot in that. And I certainly enjoy playing around with that as I'm writing. I like the idea of Max, the character in the opening scene, sort of remembering that he's actually not really Max, that he used to be somebody else 20 years previously. And that's always been bubbling away in the background. He's got his escape kit under his floorboard, but he's been living this other life, and he's almost forgotten he used to be somebody else.
I love that. And I love there's a time later, a lot of they're given code names, or they're given different names. I know that there's
work names, I call them.
Work names. And I imagine it's a unique challenge that you have to make somebody recognizable, even if you're changing their name. And I love that about that the voice is strong enough, or the character strong enough, that we don't need to be told who this person is. We're going to call everybody. Let me just say it right here. The names are the least important part of it. I'm not the same woman I was then myself, whatever name you call me by. That these people, whatever the name is, that their character is strong enough to carry through, that change, even with changes that you understand. And I know that she's talking more about that she's a different person, but I think it's really interesting, the idea of names and what is the power of a name or not having a name.
There are a couple of characters in the book who I refuse ever to identify by name. simply because it seemed more fun for me to do that than not. So I do make a theme of that idea of names, and a line like the one you just quote. I mean, I put in deliberately in order to sort of highlight the idea that I was doing this, just to let the reader know that it wasn't happening by accident. But yes, I mean, name again, it comes back to the whole heart of the genre. People are going by cover names; they're being pretending to be other than they really are, and therefore names don't really matter anymore. They are the least important thing because you can tell people, you're called anything. It doesn't have to be real. Nobody's going to know if you start passing yourself off as somebody else. Two strangers.
Well, I think it also shows how that your spy novels in particular, they're so character driven. They're not as much strongly plot driven. I mean, the plots are wonderful, but you're really, the readers there loving it, wanting the next one because they want to spend time with these characters. Do you think, are you somebody that really plots out ahead of time and then figures out which characters to be in there? Or do you choose, like, I have this idea and I think these people will be fun, and then go from there?
The novels tend to be character driven, and now, because it's a series, the first thing that I'll start thinking about when a new book is starting to happen is how the characters are going to work. Which character shall I put together with? I like putting them in different pairings in each novel, just to rattle them up a bit. And that's the sort of thing that I decide first, far before I get around to ideas of plot. Because yes, it's what these people are going to be doing and how they're going to be responding to each other and whatever situation they find themselves in. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. That's why I write. That's what I like doing. With the plots, I mean, I like to know more or less what's going on, or at least what's going to happen. But it's having a destination. I like to have the destination, but the route is something that I'm making up on a day-to-day basis, really.
You ever have put two characters together and they so irritate each other that you're like, oh, we got to get them out of the room, or I love this is delicious, let's let them pick on each other more?
Oh, if I find that two characters are really irritating each other, I put them together as often as possible, and yeah, I'm very, very cruel to my characters.
I love it. Some authors, it feels like they can bring a room to life by describing the quality of the light, or maybe they bring a place to life by describing the music that they're hearing. You seem to have a particular affinity to smells. There's something about you bringing up smells. I just want to read. This is one of my favorite parts of the books. His eyes began to stream, his head to fill. The worst smell in the world. He'd undersold it, calling it that. It was the smell of an afterlife gone bad. All the disappointments of eternity balled up in a single sensation and delivered with the subtlety of a shovel in the face. I love that so much. And I love that it's not something that, I mean, you don't see a lot of books where they talk about the smells of certain things. Now, granted, this is a particularly strong pungent smell, but smells are one of the senses that we have a more intimate, they talk about how smell brings up memories better than other senses.
So I gather, yeah.
Do you have a sensitive nose? Is this something that you think about, or including smells because they're just great atmosphere?
I'm not sure. I think largely it's accidental. I mean, the idea of the dead badger and the smell that it causes. A recent review suggested that it was, I was using it as a metaphor for the decline of institutions in the UK, which may or may not be true. But the smell itself is literal, and it's something that my brother, who lives in Devon, said to me a few years ago. That the worst smell in the world is dead badger. He told me he'd smelt one on one of his walks, and I just love the line. I love the rhythm of it, and so I took that as the starting point. So the smell was always going to be there, but it's because there really was a dead badger. In Slough House certainly is quite a smelly place, and that's just one of. But it's also damp and creaky and all sorts of things. Bad smells are just part of the disappointments that I like to fling at my characters. I think stop them enjoying themselves too much.
Love that. There's also a lot of times in the book where you make references to writers and to books and poets. There's streets that named Dickens. they talk about the detail that struck her was the local dignitary. It had a pre-war air, as if the affair had been scripted by Somerset Maugham or at a pinch Graham Greene. And then later, you sound like a dangerous poet. Dangerous is what poets ought to be. Dangerous and drunk. I love all of the references to writers and writing and books. Are you a huge reader? And do you enjoy putting those in? Are you a reader of classics and poetry as well as mystery novels?
I am. I read verse quite a lot, and I do read, or have read, many of the classics. I've studied English literature, and still read widely. I mean, I'm mostly fiction, but I read widely outside the genres. I do, and I do enjoy referencing them, and I quite often drop lines of verse into what I write. But it's not even that conscious. It's just how I think, I suppose.
Right.
I mean, it just
it's your world of references.
It is the world of references. Yes, I mean, I grew to understand the world through the books that I was reading. So it's natural that I would lean upon them when I'm trying to explain the world or have my characters explain the world to themselves as the books develop. So yes, it's just become my jargon, I guess, and it's not conscious. It's just what comes out. It's how it happens.
Now, who do you love to read? What kinds of books? Do you read many spy novels? I mean, I know a lot of mystery authors that don't actually read a lot of mystery books because they don't want to subconsciously take on anybody else's things. But do you read a lot of spy novels?
I certainly have done in the past. I think to an extent you're right. I don't read all that many now because I'm worried about absorbing too many, other people's ideas, I suppose. But I certainly grew up reading Le Carre and Len Deighton and the writers of that period, and many Cold War thrillers, books written in the 70s, which we'd probably largely forgotten about now. I mean, many of them, I've read books that I wouldn't remember, I wouldn't recognize. It's so long ago, and I read so fast in those days, I would get through a book in a day. And that was all part of just absorbing what led me on to become a writer and to become a writer in this particular genre. And the verse I still read a lot of as well, and that informs the way I write, I think.
Rhythm. I had a nice conversation with your editor. Those of you who don't know, Mick has one of the best editors in the business, Juliet Grains, and she was talking about the rhythm of the work, that the short sentences and long sentences, how you have to alternate the flow of it. And is that something that you've talked about with her, or do you just automatically have that in your writing and think about that with your writing?
I do think about it, and it's and again, it comes out of the reading that I've done, and I think it comes out of having read verse and having written verse for a while. I mean, a long time ago now. It was only when I stopped writing verse that I started writing prose fiction, and there's a certain amount of overlap in the two disciplines. I think I'm still very conscious of the syllabic weight of words. When I need to use a shorthand. But funny enough, this is something that I first remember thinking about many years ago. I had the great pleasure of interviewing your father. I don't know whether he would remember this, but it was for a magazine called Geographical, and he was in the UK promoting Wolves Eat Dogs. And I spent quite some time with him. He's very generous with his time. And he was talking about rhythm. He was talking about the rhythms of individual paragraphs that meld into the rhythms of the chapters and the book as a whole. And it made me think of the way of tidal rhythms, the way every seventh wave is bigger and so on. And it's just, and it impressed me greatly. And I thought about that a great deal since. And now I do find myself thinking in the same way when approaching my own work.
Wow. I love that anecdote. I didn't know that, but his parents were jazz musicians, and I think rhythm has always been a big part of his life. And I know a lot of mystery writers are very into jazz music, and maybe something about that rhythm, or dysrhythm sometimes.
Perhaps it's the idea of playing on familiar tunes. We're all trying to, particularly when you're working within the genre, you're playing on that stuff that's kind of established format of how, you know, a mystery novel, a spy novel, a whodunit, whatever, ought to be written, but you're trying to do your own variations on it, and so there's always that kind of improvisation going on around something that's settled, that's already there.
I love that. There are rules, and then you go break them all, make them your
Of
own.
course.
And you, before doing these spy novels, you actually had a detective series that you were doing, sort of more detective fiction. What is the difference between writing detective fiction and spy novels? And do you think you'll go back to that at some point?
The difference for me is one of cast. When I was writing the detective stories, that largely about an individual and largely from a single point of view. One of the reasons why I wanted to move into spy fiction was it gave me the opportunity to write with a larger cast of characters, and so I could have the variety of tone, the different people, different viewpoints throughout. And there were many other approaches I could have taken to have the same effect, but the spy novel is what I went for. I wanted to work within an organization, you know, have a lot of people, separate people doing more or less the same thing. So that it's that kind of cacophony that is there that wasn't there in the private eye novels that I was writing. As to whether I'll go back to them, I don't know. I feel like I never really said goodbye to my central character, Zoe Bowen, who was the protagonist of 4 of those novels. When I wrote Slow Horses, the idea was that I was going to write a spy novel and then I'd go back and write the next Zoe novel, but I kind of never returned to the starting position there. I just carried on down the road of writing these spy books. And so I never really said goodbye to Zoe. Then a few years ago, 2 years back, I put together a collection of short stories for Soho, and 4 of them, quite long ones, all had Zoe as the main character. And I remembered, it was fun to spend time with her preparing that collection. And it occurred to me that I never really did say goodbye. So I don't know, maybe I will do that one day.
That'd be great. Would you age her over the time that you've been gone, or would you pick up, do you think, where you'd left off?
Somewhere in between. I think it's difficult to age characters in real time. At least it isn't at first, but when you've been writing for 20 years, it suddenly starts to get very difficult. So
Especially
no,
if they're very active.
So no, I probably wouldn't. I'd have it. You know, if I wrote a book featuring her next year, then it would be set in 2024. But she would not have aged, 15 years or whatever it is. I'd probably have aged her 5 or 6 years.
That's fair. And now, talking about moving from being sort of a solo to a cast, you as a writer, you're solitary as you're writing. I mean, there are other people involved, but it's a very solitary, for the most part, act. Whereas the new TV series, the limited series, is, there's all these writers that you're working with, and the actors there, and the director, and all the different interpretations of your work. How has that been for you, as somebody who's used to working on their own?
I had thought it would be really difficult. I'm not a collaborative worker. I don't discuss the books as I'm writing them. It's only when they're finished and delivered that I'll talk about them, or even reveal what the title is. So I had thought it would be quite upsetting even to work, in a room with a group of other people, all of whom would be talking about, the novels that I had written. In fact, I found it a very energizing, very exciting experience, and I think it was because the people I was with. Well, it's not just that they're respectful of the material, which they are. It's that they take it seriously, and they take the characters seriously, and they really question the motivations that are going on, and the responses that these characters will have to every situation that we put them in. Discussing them always as if they were real people and these were real things that were happening. And that, I found that I was quite galvanized by that. I would leave the writer's room eager to get back to work on the novel.
Oh, wow. So did you find that it changed how you approached certain characters after you saw an actor do something one way and you thought, oh, maybe that would be an interesting thing to continue on? That little thing they emphasized might be a bigger thing now in my book.
I'm not aware of that happening, but I wouldn't be surprised if it were. I don't actually have a very visual imagination, so when I'm writing, I'm not picturing these people walking around. I'm being inside their heads, reading their thoughts, and conversing with their emotions, as it were. I don't really think about the action in that way. So I haven't noticed it happening that I'm thinking about these the actors as I write the characters. But at the same time, I don't think that it would cause any great damage to what I'm doing if I were to find myself doing that, because the actors have all gone out of their way to embody the characters as they exist in the pages of the books. So they're really doing their best to convey all the traits that I've put there and to add to them. I think the actors are taking ownership of the characters in some ways, which I love to see, and I think it is what makes the TV show successful. I mean, I think it really works on screen because of the work that they're doing in that way. But I think it is separate from what I'm doing, and I haven't yet noticed that it's that they're enfolding very much.
I have talked to the great Tom Perry, who has worked before his books. He was writing screenplays and things, and he talks about the things he learned from that process that he uses in what he writes in terms of the pace of the overall book, ending of chapters and scenes and stuff, because of the way. I think he must have worked in TV though, so they would have had commercial breaks. So he thinks of those still, even as he's writing. Is there anything about the rhythm of a television and a show like the ones that you're doing, the limited series that you're doing? Is there anything that you do bring into your writing process that's a little bit different because of how a episode is paced?
Not really. In fact, I often go way in the other direction because I like playing around with different forms of narrative. In the last Slough House novel, Bad Actors, there's a middle section which is 20,000 words long, which is just one unbroken scene. I pass the point of view around from character to character, and a lot of time passes in it, but there are no breaks. There's no there are no line breaks to indicate change of scenery or whatever. It's all one continuous flow of narrative, which is exactly the opposite of what you would want for a TV script, I think. But that's because I like playing around with the words, with the work on the page. But at the same time, I think anybody my age, or even a fair bit older, we've all grown up with television, grown up with movies, and the ways we have of depicting particular kinds of scenes, particularly action scenes, I think, are almost inevitably going to be influenced to some degree or other by the way we see these things happening on screen. And I just think that's an inevitable part of it. I say I don't have a visual imagination, but I'm very aware when I'm writing action scenes that, by and large, that scene in Bad Actors notwithstanding, I will have short scenes that cut between one point of view and another, to give that kind of kinetic energy to the narrative. And that really comes from screen editing. It comes from how we see the sort of fight scenes develop on television, for instance.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, nobody's writing in a vacuum. You're influenced by the medium that you're seeing. You're influenced by what's going on in the world. And if we could just draw it back to you sort of edge on political satire sometimes with some of the stuff that you're writing. Are you very interested in talking about politics when you're writing these books, or is it that the characters? I mean, politicians are they're wonderful characters to skewer, because of what they present and then what you find out behind the scenes. I mean, they kind of set themselves up to be the perfect villains in almost everybody's books. Do you think about that a lot?
I think that's largely it. I think that politicians are, particularly over the past decade or so, the politicians that we've mostly seen on our screens have been cartoon villains in one way or another. And I'm not going to write a supervillain, probably, and nobody's going to have an underground lair or space rockets. Although the way we've seen some of our techno millionaires behaving in the past couple of years, maybe secret lairs and space rockets are perhaps the way to go. But it felt to me that you could describe sort of villainy. The villainy of politics is perhaps the most noticeable way that bad deeds affect all our lives. So that's kind of been where I've leaning lately.
Is it more fun to write those characters than it is to write people that are nice and above board? Is it more fun to have more people that are a little bit damaged or evil?
I suspect it probably is. I've rarely tried to write anybody nice,
Yes.
so I've not really got anything to compare it with. I do write largely about damaged people, I suppose. Although the word damage probably covers quite a lot of ground. Unhappy people and failures are more interesting to explore than happy people. I think happiness doesn't necessarily have much depth. I think it could burst quite easily, whereas unhappiness goes all the way down.
It
So I
does.
like writing about people who are struggling and who have things to contend with in their daily lives, like the character of Catherine. She's not in The Secret Hours, but in Slough House, she struggles every day with. She's a recovering alcoholic, so that is an everyday battle that she has to fight. And I find the kind of courage a character like that needs is something that impresses me a great deal. So there's heroism there, but it's not a happy kind of heroism. It's a constant struggle.
It does feel like some of your characters do find a strength in the fact that they are struggling. That maybe they'd just be going along and not investigating stuff if everything was going well. But because they've been shut off to the side, put in these inquiries where nothing's going to happen necessarily, their lives, frustrated, it perversely makes them dig down and be like, oh, you know what? I'm actually going to do this work, which I really love.
I think so. I think frustration has an awful lot to do with it. And the character of River Cartwright in Slough House, I mean, he's constantly making bad decisions based on the fact that he simply wants to get a little bit of action. He wants to be doing something. So he doesn't always take the wisest course, but it's because he's frustrated and because he's bored and needs to have something fulfilling to do.
I do want to mention before we've talked for 45 minutes now. I just want to mention that if anybody in the audience has questions, one of the best parts of these live events is that you can ask questions of the author. So feel free to add that to your chat in the chat, and we will make sure to ask those of Nick. I also want to mention that a link for the book, it will be entered in the chat, and that there is a special pre-order treat for people, the first, I believe it's 40 people that purchase the book, which is wonderful. Now, to get back to the language you create, do you keep a list of all the terms and names of things and the kind of language that you've made up for them as they go through these different books?
I don't. I ought to have done, because it would make my life a lot easier if I had. I tend rather mistakenly to think if I come up with something really interesting, I'm not going to forget it. But of course, that's not true. I do. The major ones stay with me. I mean, I think probably Spook Street, the phrase, is probably the one that I'm proudest of, and that I've never let go of. That comes up frequently. But every so often, I do have to dig back into the previous novels in the series just to remind myself. Who these people are and what they're talking about. and a lot of the language, yes, I realize, I used this word once and never again. And so when that happens, I will make a note of using it again now, just to make it look like I've had this plan all along, that I'm being really consistent and that it's all there all the time. But no, I mean, I enjoyed so much in the moment, I don't always remember afterwards what it was that I did.
Well, I think it keeps it fresh, maybe. If you just
That's a nice way of looking at it, Luisa. Thank you.
Looking it up in a dictionary, like, what did I say? I'm going to say that exact thing again. I also wondered, like, this is a standalone. I mean, it's kind of brilliant. You can read this book without reading any of the other ones and have a completely satisfying experience. But if you do read the other ones, there's all these treats, because there's a few things that link this book with the other books. Do you think you'd do something like this again, or would you continue on with this particular group? I mean, I don't want to say too much to give away.
I feel that with The Secret Hours, I did something that I would like to do again. Stepping aside and writing an adjacent novel, as it were, rather than carrying on with the series. I do want to carry on with the series. I'm writing another series novel at the moment, but there might be room for more novels like The Secret Hours in my writing future, I hope. As I say, I did enjoy it a great deal.
Do you think there'd be more of the time in Berlin?
I don't know. I don't know how it would work. I think of it more in terms of mood and tone and overall structure, I suppose. But I think there's probably a limit to how many times you can have a secret file be unearthed, revealing things that happened 30 years ago or whatever. I wouldn't want to do that again, but there might be some way into other kinds of hidden histories.
I love that. Hidden
Something
history.
different. Yeah.
That's a
So
great.
I'm really not sure. This is years in the future we're looking at now.
Oh, we have a question from Ken Courier. How did you come up with the Gary Oldman character?
I think in a way he's always been there. I mean, he's Jackson Lamb in the Slough House books. But I was looking at my first published novel, Down Cemetery Road, not long ago, because that's also currently being developed for television. And there's a character in there whom I'd sort of half forgotten about, but he's very much a prototype Jackson Lamb. He's called Gerard Inchon, and he has the same kind of attitude towards other people. He can. It's not so much that he's crass and insensitive as that he behaves in a crass and insensitive way in order to annoy the people around him. It's very deliberate, and that was there, yes, in that book that I was writing back in the 90s. So I don't really know where the character comes from necessarily, but I do know that I've been carrying that character around for quite a long time now. So obviously, it's something in my DNA.
Oh, it's wonderful. Okay, so Sheila Fair asks, in the Slough House series, is it hard to have core characters get killed?
It's hard, yes, but it's kind of inevitable. I mean, it was a decision that I took a long time ago. One of the reasons I wanted to write about a larger cast of characters was so that I could perform with them in that way. That I could refresh the cast every so often, which is the euphemistic way I like to express it. And there are different reasons for doing so. I mean, the very first time I did kill off a major character, it's because I wanted to write about grief and I wanted to show what the effect of the death of that character would be on the other characters around them. So there was, that was a big part of it. And it's not something that I take lightly because when a character dies, although I don't believe in them as people, I don't talk to them or pretend that they're with me or anything. They're not real people, but nevertheless, each of them represents a tone of voice and a particular outlook that is individual. And so when a character goes, I can't use that outlook anymore. So I'm depriving myself of that tone of voice. And there are a couple, that I do miss being able to use in that way.
Oh, I
But
believe
at the
that.
same time, it keeps the series alive, I think. It keeps it fresh. And also, it allows me to write scenes of danger that will have readers on the edge because they know that I'm capable of killing characters off. They don't think, oh, this is exciting, but everything's going to be all right in the end, because sometimes it isn't.
There has to be something that could be lost, right? For there
Yeah.
to be that tension, because there has to be that potential. Um, is River Mitchell Green asks, is River Cartwright ever coming back?
I think I drop a very strong hint as to what's going on at the end of Bad Actors. But, no spoilers here. But if you look at the last few pages, you might be able to work it out.
And Bob Rigler says, you live in Oxford, but rarely use that location. Any particular reason? For example, don't poop where you sleep.
The early novels that I wrote were set in Oxford. The Zoe Bone novels are set in Oxford. It's funny that you should ask that, though. I am looking at using Oxford in the next book. Yeah.
Local politicians should be warned. Leslie Jones asked, were you pleased with the cast of Apple's Slough House characters? River, Jackson, and Catherine are so great.
They are. It's an absolutely tremendous cast. I mean, I couldn't be happier with it. And as I've said a number of times, I don't have a visual imagination, and so it didn't. I wasn't presented with anybody that I thought, oh no, that's not how I imagined them, because I just didn't have that imagination working. But the one character that I always did have quite a strong mental image of was River Cartwright, and Jack Loudon is just the spitting image of the character that I had in my head. It's extraordinary. It's like he was invented for the purpose. So I love watching him on screen. It's great fun.
That's great. Mitchell Green asks, what is the dark source of the Jackson Lamb character?
I don't really know. I think that would require a lot of forensic analysis, and I'm happy with him as he is now, and I don't want to reduce him to a set of incidents in his past that will explain why he is who he is.
Yeah.
I think his behavior is largely driven by a sense of self-loathing. I think he's done bad stuff, obviously, and perhaps he's been badly treated as well. But I wouldn't want to get very, very specific about.
It does reduce them a little bit, right? As soon as you give his parents were murdered on the way home from the theater, and that's why he's Batman. Kind of reduces it to one
it can
act
become that way. Yes,
of
that would be the danger. Yes, that you reduce him to a simple formula.
Yeah. See, Leslie Jones, is there somewhere you'd like to travel to that you've never been to research for a book?
I don't really, the Berlin scenes in The Secret Hours notwithstanding, I don't tend to travel much for work, because the whole premise of the Slough House series is these characters aren't really allowed out of the office. They never get to go anywhere. So I'm not really a traveler. I'm very much a homebody. So probably not. But I do enjoy reading books that are set in other places, and I enjoy exploring other places from the safety of my own sofa. But I'm not a big traveler. I get around a bit, but I've never hankered for adventure in that sense.
I have a feeling that the places that you would travel for research may not be hot vacation destinations.
They probably smell quite bad, Louisa.
They probably smell quite bad, exactly. Francophile says, I've enjoyed and been saddened when you kill off very interesting or likable characters. It keeps me more nervous when I read your books. That's a really good perspective. That's sort of what you were saying.
This is the idea that readers will be kept on edge because of those possibilities always being there. But as I say, it's not because I enjoy it. I don't have a sadistic outlook towards these characters. I would prefer them all to be safe and happy, but they do get up to some strange things.
But the good news is that you're always adding new characters that we can have an opportunity to get to know.
Well, this is it. If I didn't sort of make space for them, there wouldn't be room for these characters to move in. So it's swings and roundabouts, or a revolving door, as I like to think.
Well, I love this new book, Mick. Congratulations! It's really outstanding what you've done here, and it's such a treat. I highly recommend it to anybody who loves the series, or to somebody who has never read one and would like to see what it might be like. The Slough House series. It's just wonderful. So congratulations. Thank you for being with us here today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who has joined us today. And Zach behind the screens, making us look like we know what we're doing. A huge thank you to him. So thank you, Mick.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience when I dropped off screen there for however long it was. Thank you, Zach, for keeping it all together. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did.
Thank you.
Thank you.